The views and opinions of the following show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of News Talk 1450 WOL, Radio 1 Incorporated, or their management.
Welcome to Beyond Just Talk. This is a positive, inspirational, and thought-provoking program that discusses life and business topics from a solution-oriented perspective with your host, S.L. Young.
All right, welcome. It's another great day. We're ready to discuss subjects that will make a difference in your day. This is the place that people connect, ideas are shared, and lives are enriched. My name is Stacy Young. My author's name is S.L. Young, but please call me Sly. Before we get started today, next week, my guest is a woman who knows the importance of utilizing networks to maximize opportunities. Also, she's an advocate for teaching individuals about learning and appreciating life to seize the day every day. For this week, we'll recap last week's show, discuss Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, have a conversation with my special guest, Stephen A. Johnson, and my featured guest, Sharon Tindall, who is a quilt instructor, master quilter, and Underground Railroad quilt code historian and lecturer. And we'll also preview next week's guest. On last week's show, it was another very informative hour in which the topics of July being Minority Mental Health Awareness Month and the importance of science, technology, engineering, and math, otherwise known as STEM, were discussed. I shared some of the overwhelming, very personal and heartfelt responses to my article, Someone Stopped and Listened, It's the Only Reason I'm Still Alive, or its title in the Huffington Post, I Was Almost Another Suicide Statistic. My latest article, Depression Can Lead to Individuals Questioning Their Value or Values, is available for advanced review on my website at slyoung.com/depression-value.html. Based on the information I've shared about depression and mental health during Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, please don't be afraid to discuss anyone's mental health. Also, if someone says to you that something just doesn't feel right, please make a commitment to yourself that, as I've created a new hashtag, I will stop and listen. If you or anyone you know needs assistance, please contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or suicidepreventionlifeline.org. If you'd like to review my collection of materials that address depression on many different levels, including the article referenced today, the information is available at slyoung.com, depression.html. Now, moving on to last week's discussion about STEM. My guest, April Boyd Nerona, who is the Chief Solutions Architect at the STEM Broker, discussed the importance of students learning about STEM careers at an early age. She shared that adults sometimes struggle in STEM careers even after having years of training. Therefore, the earlier children can get involved with STEM, the better, especially with young girls to spur their interest. Mrs. Boyd Nerona emphasized the importance of taking a variety of science and math classes. She also recommends that individuals focus on career readiness, including the development of soft skills. Students must have the flexibility, according to Ms. Boyd Nerona, to chart their own course because STEM is a vast canvas that is open for exploration. Students should learn the basic skills, then apply them to the areas that best relate to their interests. Ms. Boyd Nerona encourages girls to learn about STEM fields because of the increased potential for job security and the numerous career opportunities. If you'd like to learn more about Mrs. Boyd Nerona's work, please visit her website at thestembroker.com. My featured guest last week was Charles Britt, who is a STEM education advocate, speaker, and entrepreneur, along with working with the U.S. intelligence community for over 12 years. Mr. Britt shared his challenging journey to professional success. A few tips he provided for students are to be committed to learn, even if it might be difficult at times. Locate a teacher, counselor, or principal that can provide the necessary support to help you succeed. And don't be afraid to change your direction to discover the courses that work best for your skill set, as you have to be comfortable with the environment, information, and your own capabilities. His advice is to obtain insights from those working in STEM-related careers. Also, he recommends that individuals identify opportunities to volunteer, as this is a great way to develop skills and also learn more about an organization. Mr. Britt also recommended that students join clubs, online forums, or affinity groups such as the National Society for Black Engineers or the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. He also discussed the importance of minority males being mentors to serve as positive role models, especially in STEM careers, which can have an underrepresentation of minority males and females. Furthermore, he advised that students should identify a mentor to help them along their journey to become STEM professionals. If you'd like to learn more about Mr. Britt's work, please visit his website at charlesbritt.com. That's CharlesBritt.com. If you missed either of these conversations, you can listen to them on my website at slyoung.com/bjt-radio.html. If you'd like to connect with me after the show, you can reach me on my website, slyoung.com, on Facebook at facebook.com/beyondjusttalk, one word, or locate me on Twitter, Google+, Instagram, and SoundCloud using the handle SLYoungVA. Now, before I continue with today's show, I want to welcome a special guest, Stephen A. Johnson, who will provide information about the importance of tutoring. Mr. Johnson has a passion for helping students reach their academic goals. He is the founder of Bright Minds Tutoring, Incorporated, located in Los Angeles, California. Stephen Johnson, welcome to Beyond Just Talk.
Hi, Sly. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. So, why is it important for students to have a tutor?
Well, you know what? It's really interesting because I'm listening to your overview of your show last week, and I actually came from a STEM career myself. Was a microbiology major in college, and what I noticed as a student was that there was many times a disconnect between what a teacher was lecturing and the experience a student was actually having in class, right? So you're in class and you're spending a lot of time and effort and investment in time, but then you're walking out of a lot of these situations, especially with the harder classes like math and science, and not really feeling connected to the material. So, as a student, I actually started tutoring as a college student, I should say. I started tutoring high school students because I felt that there was, I felt that I understood the material well enough to present it to students, but more important than that, it was that I felt that I could connect with students on a deeper level than just through the content itself, right? So tutoring is important because a lot of students need another way of explanation. So we all learn in multiple ways, and we all have various ways in which our brains operate and function. So it is good to, find someone, even if it's not your teacher, who can explain concepts and explain material to you in a way that you can actually understand and really learn from.
Yeah, one of the things that you brought up that I thought was really important is that sometimes we have sometimes a milestone gap between teaching that happens in the classroom versus practical application that happens in the work environment. And I think sometimes we need to bridge that gap a little bit and make some of the lessons that we're learning in the classroom more relevant to the things that we'll experience in the real world. So,
absolutely. So one of the biggest, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
One of the biggest complaints, right, that I hear in my line of work from students is, well, why am I learning this? Well, what's the point, right? Why am I spending all this time learning about this? This is not what I want to do as a career. Or the second largest complaint is, well, I just don't understand what my teacher's saying. I don't get it, right? So I think you're really touching on something, and that there is this huge gap in connection. Really, I think the best word that I like to use is truly connection, because a lot of students begin to kind of take on to themselves an idea or a perception of themselves that they're maybe not capable of learning, or that something is too difficult for them. But really, it's not that they're incapable or that something is too difficult. Is that they just haven't really found the right person or the right medium that connects with how they learn properly.
Yeah, and that's a very important point, because I know a number of folks who have told me that difference in the classroom happened because they had someone that they connected with personally.
Exactly.
So let me ask you, your opinion about this. So some believe that only students with academic challenges should have a tutor. What are the benefits of tutoring for students who already do well?
Right. So I think this is one of the largest kind of misnomers about my profession. Right. So when I was in high school, I had a tutor, and I'll give you a short story about myself. My family was dealing with some financial difficulty. I was on buses and back and forth to school, and I was an athlete as well, and there was just difficulty with time management, right? So I was starting to do not too well in one of my classes, not because I wasn't smart enough or because I wasn't intelligent or wasn't paying attention in class. Just I literally didn't have the time at home because of my home situation. So I got a tutor. But my experience with that tutor was that the tutor came in with these preconceived notions that, well, maybe I was a slacker, maybe I was lazy, maybe I just didn't want to be in the class. My experience with a lot of parents and students is that there is this hesitancy, right? There's a hesitation to get tutoring because of how they may be perceived, right? They may be perceived as, being dumb, or they may be perceived as not, as being lazy, right? So this is definitely not true, right? So a lot of the students that are doing extremely well in classes actually do have tutors, or may have something that you may have a parent at home that's helping them, or a family member at home that's helping them. And what I've learned over the years is that a lot of students that are in the top of their class are not doing it alone, right? So I think that's a great message to send to your listeners, is that tutoring is not just for those who are failing. It's not just for those who are lazy, or who may have been earmarked as being lazy. It's also for the successful students. I have plenty of students that I work with personally, or that my company works with, who are getting A's in class, or getting B's in classes, who are going on to great universities. And they just use tutoring to keep a leg up, to keep a competitive edge, to have that connection that we spoke about earlier, because maybe in their classroom they're not connecting. So they want to have someone there that can keep them on track and keep them on top.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the problems with perception, whether in school or in life. Others' perceptions can be limiters for individuals to be successful. So the other thing that we have to also consider is that individuals have a lot of different learning styles. So why is it important for the instructors or the teachers or the tutors to be able to identify those differences in learning styles?
Well, I have experience teaching in the classroom, and I will say that it is pretty difficult if you have 30, 40 students, like many of the public schools, and especially the inner city communities have, to individualize your instruction to every student that you have. Right? It is a monumental task actually at times, because there are so many different ways in which students learn. I think that it's a family's responsibility, a student's responsibility, to reach out to the teacher, to not be ashamed of saying, I don't understand, I don't get it. Is there another way you can explain it? Or is there some other source of information that you can point me toward? Is there a family member? Is there a parent, a cousin, a grandparent?
And I'm going to have to stop you right there, because we're about to at the end of this segment. But real quick, what advice do you have to parents who want to obtain a tutor? Just real quick.
Sure. So every college campus is full of students who are on top of their academic game. I think that it's a great source for you to find someone who can maybe serve as not only a tutor but also a mentor to your child.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you. We're going to have to leave it right there. So, Mr. Stephen A. Johnson, thanks for being on Beyond Just Talk. Wish you the best of luck with the important work you're doing to ensure students have the best opportunities for success. If you'd like to learn more about Mr. Johnson's work, please visit brightmindstutoring.co, not .com, but .co. And we'll talk to you after the break.
News Talk 1450 WOL AM, where information is power.
WOL traffic update brought to you as a service of Lead Safe America. Check the ride for you. DC 295 South. Earlier broken down vehicle near East Capitol had been cleared from the roadway. There's still some lingering delays bending past East Capitol, but you pick up the pace by the time you get to Pennsylvania Avenue. Beltway, Oxon Hill, Alexandria cleared out very nicely. Beltway scheduled road work on the inner loop near Ritchie Marlborough Road, but not seeing any real significant delay there at all. Outer loop of the Beltway cleared out of College Park into Silver Spring, which is good news. We're still finding a volume delay on northbound 270 in the local lanes into the work zone. The local lanes where the right lane is blocked between Falls Road and Route 28. Johns Hopkins University, one of the highest-ranked universities in the world, offering over 30 part-time graduate programs in D.C., Maryland, and online, advanced.jhu.edu. And brought to you by Lead Safe America is your forecast. 87 degrees now. We're on our way to the low 90s. Hot, humid, isolated showers and thunderstorms are possible. Think lead poisoning is just a problem of the past? Think again. 1 in 4 children live in a home with potential lead paint hazards. Learn more. Be safe. LeadSafeAmerica.org. Beverly Farmer. News Talk 1450 WOL AM, where information is power.
Welcome back to Beyond Just Talk with your host, S.L. Young.
All right, folks, welcome back. So as we continue on with today's show, let's discuss what we're going to do. We're going to have a discussion about the journey my featured guest took from being a skilled seamstress who used her talents to earn a steady income to become a historian, learn about the importance of quilts to communicate hidden messages that slaves used to navigate the Underground Railroad, discuss concerns about whether the Underground Railroad quilt codes are fact or fiction, and the reason it's important to maintain this information for future generations. Before I introduce today's guest, I want listeners to know that if you'd like to join our conversation, please dial 1-800-450-7876. My guest today, Sharon Tindall, is a quilting instructor, master quilter, and Underground Railroad quilt code historian and lecturer. She's given presentations at the Indonesian Embassy, various colleges, museums, and several other organizations worldwide. After a chance meeting with a professional weaver, Ms. Tindall trained in processes used to weave codes into quilts. After researching the history, message types, and usages of quilts and its codes for the Underground Railroad, she knew that this information needed to be learned, documented, and shared for future generations. Now, without further ado, I welcome my guest, who is a master quilter, a sought-after historian, and someone who is committed to documenting and maintaining this history related to the use of textiles and storytelling to bolster escape routes during the dangerous journeys that slaves traveled toward the pursuit of freedom and happiness. Sharon Tindall, welcome to Beyond Just Talk.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm glad that you're here as well. And normally I start with a question right off the bat as soon as my guests come in and they get started. But today I want to do a little bit something different because I want to start with thanking you. So I need to thank Ms. Tindall for being the guest for my radio sample show back in the spring of 2014, which I didn't do on my first or second show in error while thanking some of my other support members of my team. Ms. Tindall was very gracious and on short notice to accommodate my recording schedule. For this and the other things that you do for me, I want to publicly let you know that you mean the world to me. I appreciate your ongoing support, and I'm very proud to say that you're my friend, and I'm glad and honored to have you on my show today.
Oh, thank you. That was an unexpected pleasure. Thank you for saying all of that.
Oh, no worries. It's definitely heartfelt. So now let's get on with the show. And so, who is Sharon Tindall?
Well, Sharon Tindall is a woman of great faith, a single mother, teacher, lecturer, and I also work for Northern Virginia Community College.
Okay. And so I know that you've had some personal challenges throughout your life that required you to make some tough choices to support your family. So how were you able to keep things together to persevere during those tough moments?
First, I'd like to say a lot of prayer. And while I was sewing in my apartment, I'd have my youngest son, who is now 19, I would have him on the floor with me. We would count buttons. We would do the colors of thread, and he would help me make whatever I was going to make or whatever I needed to make, from pillows to slipcovers to alterations to wedding dresses, the whole nine. I paid my dues as far as sewing construction is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day, Abraham was older, so I said, well, let me go back and start teaching again.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back to teaching at night, G Street Fabrics, Northern Virginia Community College. I would teach quilting at night to aid myself in financing my family.
Right. And then how important do you believe that these decisions were during these tough moments, the things that you did to continue to persevere? Because you did some other things as well. We don't need to get into all those other things. But why do you think that those decisions that you made help you to identify your passion?
I always loved to sew, but I didn't have a direction. So I asked God for a direction, and he led me to the Underground Railroad quilt codes. And being naturally curious, I wanted to know if they were true. And so that led me on my quest to find out if they were true or not. And I found out that they are.
All right. So even before we get into some of the details about the quilt codes, how did you learn about the Underground Railroad quilt codes in the first place? Because I know that I hadn't heard about it until I spoke to you.
A young lady on campus asked me if I could present the quilt codes to her daughter's school.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yes, I will do that. And I came home and I had some quilt blocks that didn't belong in a quilt. So I pulled them together, did my research, and figured out what they were. And they were actually quilt codes that I later named the Underground Railroad Quilt Codes, Fact or Fiction.
And so you could have just stopped there with just that one project, but you continued on. So why was this information and knowledge important to you to invest so much time that you have in this work?
I believe it was inspired, and I believe that God gives you something and you have to develop it, and that's exactly what I did.
Okay, and then so when you met this professional weaver, so that was the sort of the connection point that got you on this path, it seems like.
Yes.
So what did this professional weaver teach you?
Patience, number one.
Patience.
And it all comes in God's time. And I asked this very frail gentleman in West Africa, is this true? And he said yes. And he showed me what he did and how he wove codes into what they call country cloth, which is what we call fabric. It's very narrow. And he showed me some codes that he had woven into this country cloth, and he gave it to me. So I have the samples. I have part of what he put into codes. And then we had a discussion about how these codes were used in our present day fabric. And I have some of that too. A lot of people believe that the slaves used their old clothes to make their quilts. Well, that is not true. When the Africans were brought to this country, they had a knowledge of weaving because that's what some of them did in their native country. So they took this knowledge of weaving and they would weave fabric for whomever. People would buy it. People would make the garments for the people to wear in this country. They would take that scrap fabric, and using that scrap fabric, they would make their quilts. They would put the codes in the quilt blocks that we see today.
And so as you were developing this knowledge, you spent some time in West Africa studying it, primarily in Liberia. So why was that important to sort of validate what you learned over there versus what you knew over here? Did you know as much, or I should say, how much more information did you obtain by traveling there versus what you did here just researching alone?
I'd say 75% of the information I gathered while in West Africa, and it's information that is in no book. I spoke to the people. I watched them sew. I watched them quilt. I gave them information that I had to help them speed up their process. They do everything by hand because it's a third world country and they don't have electricity. So I learned just as much as they learned.
And did you do anything else to research and understand the American slave experiences, specifically related to the use of quilt codes as directional guides to navigate toward freedom?
Yes, I've actually been on some of the Underground Railroad routes. I've seen some of the houses. I have spoken to people who are ancestors of slave owners. So it's been very enriching for me.
And then, so what types of materials were available here in the United States that you were reading or researching? Because like I said, I wasn't familiar with any of this. So did you go to a library? Did you go to plantations? Did you speak to folks?
I primarily spoke to people. I did go to a few plantations, and the reading information in the libraries, it's not a lot. And hopefully one day soon I'll get a book out there too.
Okay. And then some folks might say, well, I've never heard of these quilt codes, and so is it something that was actually used? How do you validate that this was something that was used? Because I know that there's critics out there that say, yeah, I don't know if this actually exists or not.
Well, I answer the critics in this way. Many families have secret recipes, and they don't tell anybody. I know for years on our college campus, we've had an underground party that administration doesn't know about because people know how to keep secrets.
Well, they might know about it now.
Yeah, that's true. And I say this, the people of African descent had a code, and you can look at this code, whether it's on fabric, whether it's on a piece of paper, and they will know that it means something. And they would ask somebody, what does this mean? You can look at a piece of my work and you will get a feeling, you'll be inspired to say something, to ask me a question, and then I can answer you. The answers are always there. You just have to ask the question.
Well, that's just like anywhere else in life, is that, don't be afraid to ask a question. And part of what I'm hearing you saying, even though you were just referring to recipes that families might have and they pass that information on and they don't share with a lot of other folks, but the other part that I heard you say is that things were passed down by word of mouth. And so that's probably an important transfer of information related to this information.
And that's one thing I learned when I was in West Africa. The gentleman that I spoke with said that they didn't need to write it down because whereas one family wove fabric, another family grew great vegetables. Mm-hmm. And that's how they survived. It wasn't necessary at that time to write things down. But in today's society, it is important to write it down for documentation.
Yeah, and documentation is important. So speaking about documentation, have you started to document any of this? I know you had mentioned that it needs to be in a book at some point. Have you started documenting some of the things that you've learned so that we don't lose the knowledge that you've gained?
It's coming. It is coming, and I have started.
Okay. And then, so notwithstanding some of the critics, which, we understand is a part of life, these things happen, and I'm sure my audience want to learn more about these codes. So how were quilt codes used?
They were used in quilts, as I said earlier. They were hung out of a window or on a clothesline or just laid out on a path. And the codes, there could be anything from the drunkard's path, which is also Solomon's puzzle, and it told you to follow the river like a drunkard. So if you got caught, people would just think you were drunk and they wouldn't hurt you as badly. Then there's the North Star.
Well, even before we go on, because I would like to provide a visual sort of picture of what that might look like. So the first one that you refer to is the drunkard path. So maybe you can tell us about what does the drunkard path look like, and then tell us what the significance is.
The drunkard's path is a series of 4-inch blocks, if you will. They can be larger or smaller, but they're connected in such a way that it looks like it's a crooked line or a crooked space. And this crooked space is usually darker, and then you have the lighter space, which is, of course, lighter, and it follows a direction, a path, to tell you to follow it like a drunkard. It's also called Solomon's puzzle when you're doing the Bible codes.
All right, so why don't we pick this up right on the other side of the break? So we'll continue to talk with Ms. Sharon Tindall about the drunkard's path and its significance in the quilt codes.
News Talk 1450 WOL AM, where information is power.
This report brought to you by Jiffy Lube Signature Service. Not just an oil change, Jiffy Lube checks vital fluids, tire pressure, lights, wipers, even vacuums the interior. A judge has ordered the suspect in a double stabbing to be held without bond. The murder happened Sunday night in Maryland. A Northern Virginia man, Song Soo Kim of Falls Church, is accused of killing a man and seriously wounding a woman at the Anna Prayer Counseling Center in Frederick County. Police say Kim called 911 and said he had just stabbed 2 people. Kim had reportedly been complaining about the food, and the victims were volunteer cooks. District police are investigating a fatal crash and say excessive speed may have been a factor. The driver, 37-year-old Seneca Espinosa of Southeast, was killed early Sunday morning along the southwest-southeast freeway near I-395. His car struck a concrete barrier and a pole. His 17-year-old son was rescued and is expected to survive. Judge Jane Merrim Roush is being named to fill a vacancy on the Virginia Supreme Court.
Governor Terry McAuliffe says Roush is the best choice to succeed retiring Justice Leroy Millett. While Millett once presided over the trial of D.C. area sniper John Mohammed, Roush presided over the trial of fellow sniper John Malvo in 2003. Roush will serve starting July 31st on an interim basis, and the Virginia General Assembly will consider the nomination when it next convenes. I'm Tom Roberts.
A grand jury is now looking into the deadly police shooting of John Gear in Fairfax County. The panel got to work yesterday. Gear was shot and killed 2 years ago in front of his home in Springfield. He was not armed, and no criminal charges were brought against the officer, Adam Torres. Torres says he reacted when Gear jerked his hands, but witnesses say that didn't happen. Matt Wieters homered leading off the 11th inning. The Orioles beat Atlanta 2-1. This report brought to you by the Foundation for a Better Life. Commitment, pass it on, from the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com. I'm John Lewis. When you're looking for news from Black America, go to newsone.com.
Welcome back to Beyond Just Talk with your host, S.L. Young.
All right, folks, welcome back. Today we have Sharon Tindall, who is a master quilter and a keeper and historian of the Underground Railroad quilt codes. And prior to the break, we were talking about the different types of symbols or blocks that are used on these quilts. And we were talking about the drunkard's path, which is a 4-inch block of crooked lines that has color differences. So right before the break, you were starting to tell us about the significance. So in that particular block, if a slave was to see that, what did that communicate?
It would communicate to go north by the river, and the crooked path would actually show you the crooked path of the river.
Okay.
And another one we could speak about would be the North Star. The North Star is a series of stars, and usually they're connected with another one. And when they're connected with another one, it gives you the direction, it gives you where you should go and what you should be careful of. The North Star is a series of stars, like I said, put together in a geometric design so that you would know which way is north. The other one that I'd like to speak about would be slave ship. And that is done in usually 2 colors, and it symbolizes the way the men and women were kept under the cabin of the ship, and the chains the poor conditions that they were under. And the colors, again, are significant. And when I always speak about the colors, the light and the dark, because that's originally how a lot of the young men and women were captured. Brightly colored scarf or handkerchief was thrown on the ground to get the young people out of hiding, because it's bright, it's pretty, it's cheerful. And being from African descent, if you see something red or yellow or bright blue, that means something different to you being an African descent versus someone who is not. And the people who ran the slave ships, they knew this. So they would throw this brightly colored piece of fabric out and lure the young folks onto the ship. And that's why slave ship is important, and that's why it's done in the colors that it's done in.
So let me just ask a question. So you have this block that represents a slave ship. Now, is that something that the slaves were using as they were on the Underground Railroad, or was this used in a different capacity?
That was used in a different capacity. One quilt block that would be used on the Underground Railroad quilt codes would be one called monkey wrench. And monkey wrench is a series of straight lines that fabric is about 2 to 3 inches wide and put together in such a way that the person would know that this quilt block meant get your things together, get your tools together. You were going to travel. Mm-hmm. You would always see that one in conjunction with the wagon wheel.
And before we get to the wagon wheel, so you have this monkey wrench that says, get your things together. So was that an indication that the path was clear ahead, or was this displayed at a certain time? How does that work?
The monkey wrench was usually displayed before the slave went on their journey. That meant get your tools together, because you're going on a journey.
So is this from someone who's indicating that they're about to leave and go on a journey, or someone who is assisting them by putting out these quilt codes is providing this information to say, we're getting ready to go on the next, we're getting ready to leave again.
On the next, yes.
If you want to go, get your stuff together now.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. The code was usually displayed before the family went on their journey. And they would see monkey wrench. They would also see bow ties. Bow ties meant get your clothes ready. And you would see these 3 in conjunction with each other. You would see the wagon wheel, you would see monkey wrench, and you would see bow ties, because that told you to get ready to go on your journey. And you had to dress differently, because whether you were going by train or you're going to be traveling on a horse and carriage, that gave you what you needed to know to get yourself ready to go on your journey to freedom.
So the monkey wrench would be displayed to say, get yourself ready. We're getting ready to go on the next adventure, if you will. And then the bow ties, that might have indicated a little bit more professional, that this part of the Underground Railroad was going to be more dressy.
Correct.
So folks would actually have to prepare with several different types of clothes, I would imagine.
They would get their best clothes. They'll get their tools, things that were important to them to go. Then they would dress nicely, as nicely as they could. And then they would see the conductor on the train, which was usually a person that was a Quaker. And they would help these people escape to freedom.
To fit in and not get caught.
Correct.
And then, so the wagon wheel, I'm sorry, I missed the significance of that. So what does the wagon wheel display?
The wagon wheel told you that's where you're going to keep your tools, in the bottom of the wagon wheel.
So the bottom of that's where you're going to keep your tools.
Correct. In the bottom of the carriage. I'm sorry.
Oh, in the bottom of the carriage.
Yes.
And then the earlier one that you referenced, I just want to make sure that I'm getting all these correct, was the North Star. Mm-hmm. And the North Star told them to follow the North Star as they were going on their travels. And how was that significant?
You would normally see the North Star and flying geese together. Flying geese is telling you to go north. If you don't know which way is north, you're going to follow the geese. And you're going to follow the geese north like the North Star. And going north was the significance for freedom.
Okay. So flying geese and the North Star together were to indicate if you want to make sure that you're heading in the right direction, make sure that you follow these things. So probably it sounds like folks weren't leaving until it was around springtime or summertime when the geese were actually flying northbound.
Correct.
Okay. And then, so are there other quilt codes that are used?
Yes, there are. There are many different quilt codes. And the significance of the color, if you are of African descent, you're going to like bright, happy colors. If you see a quilt made with more muted colors, that's going to show you something else. Because I could do a quilt in bright, happy colors that is very of African descent, and then I could do those same quilt blocks in muted colors, and that would represent the Civil War. So depending on the colors of fabric that you use and how you put them together tells you if it's a quilt code for the Underground Railroad quilt codes, or if it is a quilt used for people that were in the Civil War, and they would make quilts to send to their family members that were doing battle.
And then, so during slave times, where would folks get these various different colors of fabrics so that they can assemble these quilt codes?
The person who was making the dresses for the lady of the manor, for example, because she used a lot of fabric in her dresses, and somebody made that for her. And they take this scrap fabric and they would ask for it, and of course you can have it, it's scrap, and that's what they would use to make their quilt blocks.
Okay. And then are there any more codes that are on there?
Of course. There's many, many different codes. There's different codes that symbolize different things, and the ones that my personal favorites, I've displayed in different quilts of mine. There's African Star, there's Charm, and they also mean different things.
Okay, so let's start with the African Star and tell us about that one, and then we can talk about the Charm.
The African Star is also a star, usually not with the North Star because it means something different. The African Star means once you're here in the U.S. as an escaped slave, don't ever forget the African sunlight, the stars, and the African charm that you were born with. Some people say that escaped slaves at the time were very polite. They didn't want to look you in the eye. And that was very true because some people still don't look you in the eye. Mm-hmm. But you got to look people in the eye to let them know that you are proud of who you are. There's another one that is one of my favorite, which is charm. And that is don't forget to be charming when it's necessary. Charming, be happy, be social, whatever it takes to get what you need done.
So it sounds like the African Star and the Charm were providing some basically behavioral guidelines so that these folks wouldn't be discovered because they looked out of place.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And you can also find different ways of making each quilt block. Sometimes you'll see a variation of the different quilt blocks and look at the colors. And if you are silent and you look at it, and you can also feel nature, if you will, you get a sense of belonging from the quilt.
How do you get a sense of nature from looking at the colors on the quilt?
Depends on the colors, and it depends on your perspective. You get a sense of nature because it's usually done in natural fabrics. natural fabrics and natural colors, natural fibers. Most quilts are done in 100% cotton. I dare to be different, so I mix other textures in my quilts. I will use cotton. I will use some Dubiani silk. I will actually use mud cloth, which I brought back from West Africa. And that adds a different flair to it. And you can look at a quilt that I've done, and you'll know that it is not traditional. My quilts are called non-traditional quilts because I put other textures in them.
Okay, so I think we've done a little shift from the traditional Underground Railroad codes to the ones that you're doing as replicas today.
Correct.
So the ones that you're putting out there, how do you tie what you're doing today to bring it to a wider audience versus their actual application to what was happening with the slaves?
Well, when I present the quilt codes, I tell a story, and I ask, do you think it's true or not? And then we go from there. The quilt codes are more than just pictures of things on a quilt. It is actually a math lesson. It's actually a history lesson, and it's a science lesson if I dare to go there. It depends on who my audience is and what you want to get out of the presentation. It is something that I believe God has given me to have a wider audience, to let them know that you got to have forgiveness, you got to trust, you got to be yourself. To thine own self be true. Ask questions. Do what God gave you to do to get the answers that you need for your life. I also ask some students to write down a story of their own pertaining to the quilt codes. And if you had this situation in your life, how would you overcome it? What would help you overcome this situation?
So it sounds like there's a little bit of history and math and science that you're trying to incorporate into these and to the current day and the folks that you're teaching about these?
Correct.
Why is that important compared to the historical references to these codes? Because I'm not making the connection. I'm sorry.
It is visual learning. Everybody doesn't learn the same. So if I can give you a message through my quilts, that's what I do. I talk to you about many different things within the quilt codes, but it is basically a story that I've come to find to be true. And I explain it, I tell the story, and then I bring the math portion into it, I bring the historical portion into it, and I bring the science portion into it.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to stop before we head on to the break. So we'll continue this conversation on the other side.
News updates on the web at WOL DC News.com.
Good morning. This WL Traffic Update is brought to you by Unbound. Alabama Avenue at Naylor Road Southeast. Earlier accident cleared. Everything is gone. On the shoulder now, southbound Kenilworth Avenue. The accident between East Capitol Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. A little slow to get through there. And on Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest at 9th Street downtown, this demonstration, you're going to be sent around all that activity. At Unbound, they believe mothers around the world have the power to lift their families out of poverty. That's just one way Unbound is different. Learn more at unbound.org. Now your WOL weather forecast brought to you by Food Lion. For today, clouds and sun, highs in the upper 80s to near 90. A few clouds overnight down to 73. Tomorrow, partly cloudy early. Scattered thunderstorms in the afternoon, a high near 91. Shop at Food Lion between now and July 28th. You could instantly win up to $100 in groceries. Visit the store or foodlion.com/grocery giveaway for details. Some exclusions apply. No purchase necessary. Steve Hirschhorn for News Talk 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Welcome back to Beyond Just Talk with your host, S.L. Young.
All right, folks, welcome back. I have in studio with me today Sharon Tindall, and we're talking about the quilt codes that were used on the Underground Railroad. And so in the last segment, I think we sort of crossed in a little bit of the history versus what's happening in current day. So I know one of the things that you're trying to do is that you've done this research, you have all this information, there's various codes that are used. We've talked about the North Star, we've talked about what is the Drunkard's Path and Solomon's puzzle, the African Star, and the charm. So now what you're trying to do is to bring this to the next generation and share the information that you've learned in Africa. So what's the process that you use to go out and share the information that you've learned?
Well, the process is when I teach, whether it be at G Street Fabrics or at Northern Virginia Community College, whatever I'm teaching, and I'm usually teaching quilting or some form of it, I let the students know that this is what's going on. and then I get input from them. And I also, for the college, usually someone will contact me and say, I'd like you to do a presentation for Black History Month or for Women's History Month, or just have a display in the museum. And when I present in those fashions, people always ask me more questions, and then they want more information, and then that's how I get it out there.
And, one question that actually came up as you were talking just now is historical significance. And are there any quilt codes that exist from the time of the slave days?
Yes. And yes, and they are going to be a part of my presentation in the book because I have, like I said earlier, I do have the information, I do have the documentation, and I have pictures of the very frail gentleman who spoke with me. Okay,
so tell us a little bit about these quilts that you found. Where did you discover them, and what information did you obtain from the person who gave them to you, or did you just find them in a pile someplace and somebody said, well, those were represented, or did you have someone to actually tell you the significance from those historical conversations?
The information that I have actually came from the gentleman in West Africa who wove codes in the fabric. And that is what I have, and I'm kind of holding on to it. And life will allow me to sit down one day and write the book.
Okay, so this gentleman has codes that are woven into the book. So was he a former slave, or did he receive this information from someone else? So I'm trying to make the connection. How did you learn that this information is validated from prior slaves and used during the American slave trade?
This gentleman, like I spoke earlier, he was very old. And he was maybe second or third generation from his family being taken away to this country to be slaves. And this information was born into them. Mm-hmm. And when he saw something from the U.S. that I had brought to him, he says, oh, yes, I remember doing this as a young man and teaching my family how to do this. This meaning weave a code in a fabric. So it has come almost full circle. This gentleman would weave a code that meant graduation, for example. He saw that same code, if you will, in something that I had done. And that's how we got the information, and that's how I made the connection.
So the quotes that you're referring to were the ones that were in West Africa and that were passed down from information that was taken from
his
free
family,
slaves.
Yes.
And that's how you put this information together.
Correct.
But you don't. Do you have any of that information from anybody who still currently resides in the United States?
No, I don't. People are very guarded with their information.
Okay. And if someone is interested in learning this craft, are there any classes that are available?
I will be teaching quilting for Northern Virginia Community College in September, and you could go on the college website to get more information. I believe the class will start September 12th. And it's every other Saturday from 9 to 12.
And then if someone was wanting to attend any of your lectures in person, I know that I think last year you did some presentations out in Fairfax County, it might have been, or somewhere like that.
Yes, I will be presenting for Northern Virginia Community College Woodbridge campus late January and the Smithsonian in February.
And then one of the other things that I just remembered is that you had a presentation that you have relative to the quilt codes and whether it's history or fact. And so tell us about that presentation that you put together. Why did you put it together? What's the significance of it? And what were some of the discussions relative to these conversations?
At the time that I put it together, I didn't know if it was true or not. So I put it together as the Underground Railroad Quilt Codes, fact or fiction. Mm-hmm. But since then, I found out that it is true. And my next presentation will go into that deeply.
And so where are these quilts displayed? So if somebody wants to see your exhibit for themselves to make their own determination whether it's something that's good or not, or whether it's accurate or not, where can somebody find your displays?
The next one will be late January at Northern Virginia Community College Woodbridge campus. That's my next date.
Okay, so it sounds like a lot of the things are relative to the Northern Virginia Community College. And then if somebody wants to schedule you, how do they get in contact with you?
They could email me at quilts, QUILTS, by Sharon 55 @gmail.com.
So we've talked about the quilt codes relative to the Underground Railroad quilt codes. Are there other information was there other information that you gained from your research relative to the American slave trade of things that we might not have been aware of?
Yes. In the quilt codes, I've also learned, and I learned this when I was in West Africa, I learned that not only did the people weave, they were great mathematicians, and there are signs of that in the quilt blocks themselves, how certain things are squares, triangles, rectangles, and all of that aids in a person learning, whether it be mathematics or whatever. The quilt codes aid you in learning.
Right, but I also was trying to find out, was there any other information that you were able to obtain through your history that you might be able to share with us other than the quilt codes? Did you learn anything else about the American slave trade or histories or secrets that we might not have known anything about as well?
There were a lot of secrets, and the slave trade was something that was awful, and it was horrible, and the younger generation really doesn't know about it. So I try to get that message across to them to let them know that they got to forgive whatever happened and they got to move on.
Okay, but there weren't any other things that they were doing other than the quilt codes or anything else that you were able to find?
It was a very hard trip for me because it was a third world country that I went to visit. And I did get to see the island where when the slaves were brought back to West Africa, I got to see the island where they came back to. And I got to cross the James River. I was in a car, but I also got to learn how God intended us to live. It was beautiful, and pictures don't do it justice. And then I saw extreme poverty on the other side.
And so when you were doing your research, did you see anything in the museums or exhibits in the country that anywhere closely resembled the things that you're documenting in your studies and travels and discussions?
I saw a lot of things that were similar.
Okay, so like what?
Well, the lack of education for the young people, I got to see that, and how we in this country don't appreciate a good education. I got to see many things that hurt my heart, hurt my soul, but it's my job to do what I do to continue to try to help.
And so, there's a lot of things that I've seen in the history books, and there's not a lot about quilt codes. There's a lot of things that aren't discussed. I know that sometimes folks have these conversations. Did any of your family members have anything that they shared with you, or did you have any friends or other folks that have had experiences as being several generations removed from being slaves in this country that you referenced as well?
I actually had started doing some research on my own family, and I found some very interesting facts, and I'm on my way to a part of Virginia where my ancestors actually came to this country. An island outside of Whitestone, Virginia is what it used to be called, but it's called something else now. And I am probably in the fall going to take a trip down to see exactly where my family came from.
And then thinking about with us being in the D.C. metropolitan area, have you visited any of the museums, and does the Smithsonian have anything that's similar to these quilt codes or verbal history or recorded history and any other types of crafts?
I haven't seen it. If it is, when I go to the museums, and that's something I would do with my sons, I haven't seen anything like it. I've seen some quilts, the quilts from G. Spence. I've seen them, but it's a little different than what I do.
Now, are there any other groups that have used things that are similar to the quilt codes in their work other than in the African Society?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Well, I think that's pretty much about all we have for today. I know that, there's a lot of different information that can be obtained on the research that you're doing. And I know that there's a lot of different things relative to quilt codes and the quilting and the history that's in Africa that folks can hopefully be able to glean when you document some of this in your upcoming book. And I just know that folks are interested in some of the things that have happened and some of the history relative to the slave trade and the experiences that have happened in this country. So I thank you for your time and being on my show today to share your experiences and your lessons. On next week's show, my guest will be Jasmine Stringer, who is a master connector and experienced business development and account management professional, along with being someone who knows the importance of utilizing networks to maximize opportunities. Remember, your candle is fueled from within, so don't let anyone reduce or block the fuel to maximize its brightness. Enjoy the rest of your week. Until next time, my friends, have a good one.
1450 WOL.